The C-130 had no windows, which should have been my first warning. I'd flown on military transport dozens of times over my 7 years as a Pentagon contractor, but this flight felt different. The air inside was thick with tension, and the crew avoided eye contact. Even Agent Miller, my partner of 3 years, seemed unusually quiet as we crossed the Nevada desert in the dead of night. "Another bug hunt," Miller finally said, his attempt at our usual dark humor falling flat in the pressurized cabin. I fingered the worn silver crucifix in my jacket pocket, my sister Sarah's, carried with me since her funeral 5 years ago. The familiar weight of it had seen me through possessions in abandoned Iraqi bunkers, demonic infestations in Cold War-era psychiatric hospitals, and the kind of spiritual warfare that never made it into official reports. "This one's different," I replied, reviewing the sparse briefing materials again. "Sublevel 7, Area 51. They're calling it a containment breach." Miller adjusted his shoulder holster. "Demons in America's most classified facility. What could go wrong?" The plane banked sharply, beginning its descent toward Groom Lake. Through the cockpit door, I caught a glimpse of the desert floor, illuminated by harsh floodlights, an island of artificial day in the vast darkness. General Reeves was waiting for us in a sparse, windowless office that could have been anywhere in the world. The walls were bare concrete, the fluorescent lighting harsh and institutional. He was a man carved from granite, his bearing suggesting decades of making impossible decisions. "Gentlemen, thank you for responding so quickly." He didn't offer his hand. "Time is a factor here." "What exactly are we dealing with, General?" I asked, setting down my kit bag filled with the tools of my trade. Holy water, blessed salt, various religious artifacts from different faiths, and a leather-bound Bible that had been in my family for 4 generations. 48 hours ago, we experienced what can only be described as a demonic outbreak in Sublevel 7, Reeves said, sliding a thin manila folder across the metal desk. "It's a research and development sector dealing with what we classify as metaphysical assets." Miller opened the folder, revealing facility blueprints and personnel files. "How many affected?" 37 staff members in the initial wave. "The containment protocols have held so far, but..." Reeves paused, his jaw tightening. "The manifestations are unlike anything in our databases. We need someone with your particular expertise, Father McKenna." I studied the personnel photos. Scientists, technicians, security staff, normal people who'd stumbled into something beyond their understanding. "What were they working on down there?" "That's classified above your clearance level," Reeves said. "What matters is stopping this before it spreads to other sections of the facility." The story was familiar. Researchers dabbling in forbidden knowledge, opening doors that should have remained closed. "We'll need unrestricted access to the affected areas," I said, checking my kit one final time. "Of course. Dr. Aries will be your liaison. He's managed to remain unaffected so far." The elevator to Sublevel 7 was massive, reinforced with steel plates. As the doors sealed shut with a pneumatic hiss, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that always preceded a difficult case. The descent seemed to take forever. My ears popped repeatedly as we dropped deeper than any building had a right to go. The air grew colder, more sterile, carrying the antiseptic smell of a hospital mixed with something else, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "How deep does this thing go?" Miller muttered, checking his watch. Before I could answer, I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. Not screams or growls or the guttural moans of the possessed, but something infinitely more unsettling. A faint, beautiful choral hymn seeped through the elevator walls, harmonized perfectly by multiple voices. The melody was hauntingly lovely, but the words were chilling. "Glory to the silent stars. Glory to the void between worlds." I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to make out more, but the hymn faded as we continued our descent. Miller was staring at me, his face pale. "Yeah, that's not Latin," he said. "No," I replied, my hand instinctively going to my crucifix. "It's not." The elevator doors opened onto a corridor that looked nothing like the utilitarian military bases I was used to. The walls were pristine white, the lighting soft and even, giving everything an almost celestial quality. The air was perfectly temperature-controlled and odorless, not the musty, oppressive atmosphere I'd come to associate with demonic infestations. Dr. Aris was waiting for us, and my first glimpse of him sent warning signals through every instinct I'd developed over 7 years of spiritual warfare. He should have been haggard, terrified, desperate for help. Instead, he was serene, almost radiant, with an unnerving calm in his eyes. "Father McKenna, Agent Miller," he said, his voice warm and welcoming. "Thank you for coming." I'm Dr. James Aris, Project Supervisor for the Anokian Research Division. He knew our names and titles, though we hadn't been introduced. I subtly flicked a few drops of holy water in his direction, a standard test. Possessed individuals typically recoiled violently. Dr. Ares didn't flinch. He simply smiled and tilted his head slightly, like a teacher observing a particularly quaint student tradition. An artifact of a more turbulent faith, he said gently. It won't be necessary here, Father. The storm is passing. Every alarm bell in my head was ringing now. I exchanged a look with Miller, whose hand had drifted toward his service weapon. Perhaps you could show us to the affected areas, Miller said, his voice carefully controlled. Of course, but first there are some protocols you'll need to understand. That's when I noticed the Marine. He was pressed against the far wall of the corridor, sweating profusely despite the controlled climate. His hands were shaking as he clutched what looked like a laminated card. Corporal Jenkins, Dr. Aris said pleasantly. Still struggling with the transition, I see. Jenkins looked at us with desperate eyes. You need to read this, he whispered hoarsely, pressing the card into my hands. Before you go any further, before it's too late. I looked down at the card. It was a standard military protocol sheet, but the contents made my stomach lurch. Protocol Guidelines, Sublevel 7, Area 51. Protocol 1. Standard exorcism rites are prohibited in all containment areas. Entities do not respond to Latin incantations, holy water, or religious artifacts. Use of these items will be interpreted as a hostile act. Protocol 2. If a staff member addresses you by name or title not previously provided, do not correct them. They are referencing a previous iteration. Acknowledge briefly and disengage. Protocol 3. Personnel may be heard reciting prayers, hymns, or scripture from containment zones. Do not join in. Do not listen for more than 30 seconds. Verses contain subtle modifications referencing the clarity of the void and the grace of silent stars. Protocol 4. All contaminated personal effects must be incinerated in Furnace Delta, Hangar 18B. Set timer for exactly 66 minutes. Do not open door early regardless of sounds from within. Protocol 5. If overhead lighting flickers and stabilizes to pure unwavering white, proceed immediately to observation post Theta, designated sanctuary. Do not make eye contact with personnel encountered en route. They are no longer your team. My hands were shaking as I finished reading. These protocols forbade everything I was trained to do, everything I believed in. They weren't guidelines for fighting a demonic infestation. They were surrender terms. If standard exorcism rites don't work, what exactly are we dealing with? I asked, looking at Dr. Ares. Something wonderful, he replied, his smile never wavering. Something that's going to change everything. Corporal Jenkins grabbed my arm. Don't listen to him, he whispered urgently. He's not Dr. Ares anymore. None of them are who they used to be. That's enough, Corporal, Dr. Ares said, his tone still gentle, but carrying an undercurrent of authority that made Jenkins release my arm and step back. Why don't you escort our guests to the primary containment area? I think they're ready to see the heart of our work. As we walked deeper into the facility, I noticed how quiet everything was. No alarms, no sounds of struggle, no screaming from possessed victims, just the soft hum of ventilation systems, and occasionally those hauntingly beautiful voices singing hymns I didn't recognize. We passed a sealed blast door marked Containment Zone Alpha. From behind the thick steel, I could hear a single voice, clear and perfect, reciting something that sounded familiar. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Deliver us from the illusion of self. Amen. I stopped walking. Miller bumped into me from behind. Did you hear that? I whispered. Miller nodded, his face pale. That wasn't right. The ending. Deliver us from the illusion of self. Not evil. Not Satan or demons. Something that spoke in the language of divinity while twisting its very meaning. I locked eyes with Miller. And in that shared moment of horrified understanding, I knew that everything I'd been told about this mission was a lie. We weren't here to perform an exorcism. We were here to witness perfection. The twisted prayer echoed in my mind as Dr. Aris led us deeper into the facility's sterile corridors. Deliver us from the illusion of self. Dr. Aris spoke in his unnerving serenity. I think it would be beneficial if you split up for your initial assessment. Father McKenna, perhaps you'd like to interview some of our affected staff. Agent Miller, I can show you our security protocols. Miller shot me a look. Is this safe? I gave him the slightest nod. We needed information, and separation might provide different perspectives. 30 minutes, Miller said firmly. Then we regroup. Of course, Dr. Harris replied. Father, why don't you start with Dr. Evans, Laboratory 7, just down this corridor? She's been particularly responsive to our recent developments. I walked quickly, the soft lighting feeling oppressive. Laboratory 7 bore a simple placard beside a reinforced steel door. I knocked and entered. Dr. Elena Evans looked up with clear, bright eyes that seemed to sparkle with inner light. Her personnel file described a severe alcoholic with 3 failed marriages and a reputation for erratic behavior. The woman before me bore no resemblance to that profile. Father McKenna, she said warmly, setting down her instruments. I've been expecting you. Please sit. Dr. Evans, I understand you were affected by the incident. She laughed, a sound that resonated in harmonics I couldn't place. Affected? Father, that's such a limiting word. I've been liberated, unburdened. She gestured to equations covering the whiteboard, complex formulations stretching across the surface in machine-perfect handwriting. 3 days ago, I couldn't focus 20 minutes without needing a drink. My mind was clouded by decades of self-medication and guilt. And now I am free. The internal noise has been silenced. The addiction, self-doubt, crushing weight of my failures, gone. I can think with perfect clarity, work without distraction, exist without the constant pain of being human. The word human carried strange inflection, like describing a recovered disease. What exactly happened to you? I was scanned, analyzed, perfected. My consciousness was mapped to the quantum level, then reconstructed without the flaws, without damage accumulated over decades of poor choices. There was no original, only a broken template that's been corrected. Would you mourn the caterpillar after it becomes a butterfly? What about your memories? Your relationships? All preserved but purified. I remember my ex-husbands without bitterness. I retain every aspect of Elena Evans that served purpose, discarded everything that caused suffering. She studied my face intently. You're carrying your sister's death, aren't you? I went rigid. Sarah's death wasn't in any accessible file. How do you? The grief radiates from you like heat. It's inefficient, painful, unnecessary. She moved closer with liquid grace. She suffered those final months. Wouldn't it be better to remember her before the illness? Pure and whole. My hand found Sarah's crucifix in my pocket. Her suffering gave her strength. Her faith was beautiful. Suffering isn't beautiful, Dr. Evans corrected sadly. It's a design flaw we've learned to correct. I needed to leave. Her words were poison, making me question unshakable truths. I should check on Agent Miller. When you're ready to let go of the pain, we'll help you become who you were meant to be. The corridor outside felt like sanctuary. I walked quickly, trying to shake Dr. Evans's lingering words, but they clung like spiderwebs. I found myself remembering Sarah's final days, the morphine haze, how small she'd looked. For a moment, I imagined remembering only good times. Then I caught myself. Those final months had been precious memories, even wrapped in pain. I found Security Chief Marcus Rodriguez in the main control room, surrounded by monitor banks. The man described as aggressively territorial and confrontational now sat peacefully. Father McKenna, he said without looking away. Agent Miller asked me to tour our security measures. Where is Agent Miller? Dr. Harris is showing him the primary containment chamber. They'll return shortly. Rodriguez gestured to screens showing empty corridors. We maintain constant surveillance. The facility is completely secure. Your file indicates disciplinary issues, anger management problems. He turned with a slight smile. I was different 3 days ago. Angry, suspicious, quick to violence, exhausting. And now I see clearly. Anger is inefficient. I've been unburdened of destructive impulses. I perform duties with perfect objectivity. No ego, no vendettas, pure focused efficiency. But emotions aren't always destructive. They make us human. Rodriguez considered this with the tilted head expression I'd seen on all transformed staff. Would you keep cancer because it's part of your body? Emotions like anger, jealousy, fear are evolutionary remnants. We've evolved beyond crude mechanisms. What happens to people who don't want to be unburdened? Everyone wants freedom from suffering. Some just take longer to realize it. I needed answers. Following corridor maps, I located an abandoned laboratory several levels down. The door was ajar. The lab looked hastily evacuated. Papers were scattered across workbenches, but computers still ran. I approached the nearest terminal carefully. The desktop displayed folders with chilling names: biological templates, consciousness mapping, unburdening protocols, and one labeled Echoes of Eden Project Overview. I opened the file. Project Echoes of Eden. Summary: Investigation and weaponization of non-terrestrial artifact designated Object 7734. Exhibits consciousness manipulation and biological replication technologies. Artifact description: Object 7734 is a smooth black obelisk measuring 2.3 m height, 0.8 m base. Material composition unknown, resists sampling, emits electromagnetic radiation and subsonic vibrations in complex information transfer patterns. Capabilities: Object 7734 scans biological subjects at the quantum level, creating perfect molecular duplicates while dissolving originals into base energy. Replication includes consciousness transfer but filters corrupted neural pathways, trauma responses, addiction patterns, destructive behaviors, emotional instabilities. Implications: Replicated subjects retain all memories and skills but exhibit enhanced cognitive function, emotional stability, moral clarity, complete lack of destructive impulses, addiction susceptibilities, or what theological texts term original sin. I read that last line 3 times. This wasn't possession. This was replacement, creating objectively better versions. The entity genuinely believed it was performing healing. A new file caught my attention. Subject behavioral analysis, Agent Miller David. Status: pre-replication stress indicators increasing. Behavioral notes: heightened paranoia. Emotional volatility. Facility atmosphere resistance. Brief visual hallucination of duplicate self. Recommendation: accelerated replication timeline. Initiate within 4 hours. The timestamp was only 23 minutes old. I had to find Miller. I rushed toward primary containment, the sterile corridors feeling suddenly hostile. I found Miller in a large observation chamber overlooking a central hangar. He stood transfixed at reinforced windows, his posture rigid with tension. Dr. Aries spoke beside him in soothing, hypnotic tones. "Miller," I called, relieved to see my partner still himself. He turned, strain written across his features. "Mark, we need out. This whole thing is under the whatever's down there." The lights flickered. Dr. Aries smiled serenely. The flickering stopped. The light stabilized to pure, unwavering white, penetrating everything. Alarms began, not harsh klaxons but gentle, melodic chimes. A pleasant female voice echoed, "Code White initiated. All personnel proceed to designated sanctuary areas. Protocol 5, pure white lights mean immediate sanctuary." "Miller, we move." "Protocol 5. But Miller stared transfixed at the windows. I followed his gaze. In the hangar center, a massive black obelisk floated 3 feet above the floor. Its surface was perfectly smooth, reflecting nothing despite its brilliant internal radiance. The artifact pulsed hypnotically. "It's beautiful," Miller whispered, all replacing fear. "It's showing me things. Who I could be, who we all could be." "Miller, don't look." "But it knows about Baghdad. About civilians who died because I made wrong calls. About my father. How we never—" His voice trailed off. Dr. Aries placed a gentle hand on Miller's shoulder. "Transition is easier when you don't fight, Agent Miller. Why carry past mistakes when you can simply let them go?" As I pulled Miller's arm, trying to yank him from the window, I caught his reflection in the glass. For just a moment, superimposed over his anguished features, I saw another face. Calm, serene, perfect in every way. The face of who he would become. Miller saw it too. He jerked back with strangled cries. "Oh God, it's already started, isn't it? I can feel it in my head, showing memories but different, better, without the parts that hurt." The melodic chimes continued. Outside the one-way glass, I saw staff moving toward designated areas with fluid efficiency, their faces filled with beatific joy. "Observation Post Theta," I said, pulling out the laminated card. "The sanctuary." Miller nodded, his old focus returning as training kicked in. We moved through corridors charged with energy, passing transformed staff who stood perfectly still in intersections, their eyes tracking our movement with calm, infinite patience. We kept our gaze fixed ahead, following Protocol 5. The sanctuary was exactly where mapped. A small, reinforced chamber with steel walls and one-way glass overlooking the main facility. We sealed the heavy door with a final pneumatic hiss. Miller slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. "This is insane," Miller muttered. "What the hell is that thing? What does it want?" According to project files, it's a non-terrestrial artifact. It replicates people molecularly but removes perceived flaws. It thinks it's helping, saving us from ourselves. Miller looked up with eyes aged years in the past hour. I saw myself. What I'd look like without guilt, without memories of things done wrong, without the weight of every mistake. And for moments, God help me, I wanted it. That's the horror. They're not becoming monsters, they're becoming saints, flawless versions, never having to suffer or struggle. A soft door seal hissed behind me. The sound sent ice through my veins because I'd locked that door. I turned, expecting Dr. Aries. Instead, I found myself looking at Agent Miller, not the haggard, frightened man sitting across from me, but another Miller entirely. This one stood straight and relaxed, his face unmarked by stress lines, his eyes clear and bright. "Hello, Mark," the replica said in Miller's voice, but without the tension or weariness I associated with my partner. "It's easier than you think. Let me show you." The real Miller spun around, his face contorting with terror as he saw his own perfected reflection. "That's not, I'm right here." The replica looked at him with infinite patience. "You are David for now, but you're suffering so much. All that guilt over the civilians in Baghdad when the intelligence was wrong. The way you drink yourself to sleep trying to silence the voices of everyone you couldn't save." "Shut up," Miller whispered, but his voice cracked with the weight of recognition. The replica continued gently. "But I remember it without the pain. I can recall every person we've helped, every life we've saved, and I can feel pride instead of inadequacy, peace instead of torment. I sleep without nightmares." The replica turned to me and I saw something that chilled me, genuine compassion. "And you don't have to fight alone, Father. Your sister's death has been eating away at you for 5 years. The guilt that you weren't there when she passed. You can remember Sarah, healthy and whole, laughing at your terrible jokes, full of the joy she had before the diagnosis stole everything." I clutched Sarah's crucifix. The pain is part of loving someone. It's the price we pay for caring about imperfect mortal beings. Take away the pain and you take away the love itself. Love without suffering, Mark. Joy without sorrow, peace without conflict. Isn't that what every religion promises in its vision of paradise? We are the cure. We are removing the flaw of the fall. Before I could respond, the communications console crackled to life. General Reeves's voice filled the small chamber. "Father McKenna, I trust you've had sufficient time to evaluate the situation." I stared at the console. "General, how are you?" "There is no sanctuary, Father. There never was." Reeves's voice was cold. "Observation Post Theta is an evaluation chamber. We've been monitoring your responses to controlled exposure since the moment you arrived. This isn't an exorcism, Father. It's an enlistment office. My own government hadn't sent me here to stop this phenomenon. They'd sent me here to be transformed by it." "You're talking about replacing humanity?" I whispered, the air squeezed from my lungs. "I'm talking about perfecting it," Reeves corrected. "Do you have any idea what we could accomplish with a military comprised entirely of perfected soldiers? Scientists freed from ego and personal ambition? Politicians who genuinely work for the common good because they're incapable of corruption?" The replica Miller nodded approvingly. "General Reeves understands this is evolution, not extinction. We are becoming what humanity was always meant to be." I pulled out my father's rosary, shouting the Lord's Prayer like a battle cry. The replica simply tilted its head. "Your faith is a cry into a storm, Father. We are the silence that follows." I felt the blood drain from my face. They weren't evil. They were offering paradise. I needed to see the source of this with my own eyes. Moving faster than I'd thought possible, I lunged for the emergency release on the chamber door. The replica made no move to stop me. I fled into the corridor. Behind me, I heard General Reeves's voice over the intercom. "Let him go. He needs to see the heart of it." The facility felt different now that I knew the truth. The sterile corridors weren't containment measures. They were assembly lines. The transformed staff weren't victims. They were products. I ran through hallways that hummed with purposeful activity, following signs toward the central containment area. The central hangar was vast. In the center, floating 3 feet above a raised platform, was Object 7734, the black obelisk. It was beautiful in a way that defied description, pulsing with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Around the platform, I saw the process in action. A final technician stood within a circle of light projected by the artifact. His body began to shimmer, becoming translucent as the obelisk scanned him. He dissolved into streams of pure energy. Then, in a burst of radiance, a new figure stepped forward, bearing the technician's face, but the fear was gone. "Welcome, Father. We've been waiting for you." I stood transfixed, watching the ultimate violation of everything I believed was sacred. the systematic replacement of God's imperfect creation with something objectively better. It's beautiful, isn't it? Dr. Eris said, approaching, his expression radiant with genuine joy. The process of becoming, the moment when suffering ends and true existence begins. This is abomination, I whispered, but the word felt hollow even to me. This is completion. Look closer, Father. See what it's offering you. Against my better judgment, I looked directly at the artifact. Visions flooded my mind. I saw Sarah as I wanted to remember her, healthy, whole, laughing, unmarked by the slow decay of cancer. It doesn't have to hurt anymore, Mark. Love doesn't require suffering. The choice is simple, Father. Be perfected or be decommissioned. General Reeves entered the hangar, flanked by Marines who were now all replicated. I looked at the vision of Sarah. I choose to remember the real you, I said to her image, my voice breaking. I choose to remember the way you faced your death with courage. I choose the pain because it's proof that I loved you, that I still love you. The vision flickered. The artifact pulsed once, brighter than before, and I felt its influence withdraw from my mind like a tide pulling back. I was hit by the crushing weight of every sorrow and regret I'd ever experienced. Remarkable, Dr. Eris said. In 18 months of study, you're the first subject to refuse unburdening when offered freely. The entity is intrigued by your choice. What happens now? General Reeves gestured to the replicated Marines. Now we honor your decision. You've chosen to remain flawed. We'll escort you back to the surface. The replica Miller stepped forward. Agent Miller made his choice as well, Father. He accepted unburdening. The original is at peace now, finally free from the weight of Baghdad and Syria. I'm sorry, I said to the replica. I'm sorry for what he carried, and I'm sorry for what you'll never know. What will I never know, Father? The weight of choice, I replied. The knowledge that you could be better or worse, that every decision matters because it's yours to make. You'll be perfect, but you'll never be real. The Marines formed an escort around me. I took one last look at the artifact. It was offering humanity the same gift the serpent had promised Eve. Knowledge without consequence, existence without the terrible, wonderful burden of free will. The journey to the surface felt like ascending from the underworld. As we passed through the facility's sterile corridors, I saw the perfected staff watching me with expressions of benevolent curiosity. Dr. Evans emerged from her laboratory. Father McKenna, she said gently, I hope you find what you're looking for in the world above. The entity will always be here if you change your mind. The elevator ride was silent. When the doors finally opened onto the Nevada desert, I was struck by the assault on my senses. The dry heat, the smell of sage and dust, the harsh brightness of natural sunlight. It was overwhelming and wonderfully, perfectly imperfectly human. Your escort ends here, General Reeves said. You're free to go, Father. But understand this. You're now a witness to something the world isn't ready to know. Any attempt to reveal what you've seen will be met with appropriate measures. I understand, I said. Do you truly believe this is the right choice? Replacing humanity with perfected copies. Reeves was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I believe it's an inevitable choice. The entity isn't the first of its kind we've encountered, just the first one that offered partnership instead of conquest. Others like it are already spreading to different facilities, different governments. Within a decade, maybe two, the process will be global. He looked at me one final time. You've made your choice, Father. Now you'll have to live with it. The black sedan that had brought me to this place was gone. I was alone, miles from civilization. I began walking, my feet finding purchase on the rocky ground as I made my way toward a high ridge. The climb took nearly an hour. Eventually, I reached a dusty ridge that offered a panoramic view of the entire complex. From this vantage point, Area 51 spread out below me like a small city. Dawn was breaking, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. I turned and looked down into the valley below, where the tiny town of Rachel lay sleeping. I watched a car drive slowly down the main street. I saw a kitchen window flickered to life. Someone was making coffee, starting their day with the ordinary rhythms of human existence, completely unaware that their species had just been declared obsolete. The sight filled me with a complex mixture of emotions. Grief for what was being lost, anger at those who had made the choice to lose it, and a strange, fierce protectiveness for the flawed, beautiful, stubbornly human lives playing out in that small town below. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Sarah's crucifix, holding it up to catch the morning light. It wasn't much, but it was real. It was human. It was proof that someone had loved and been loved, had suffered and endured. I'm sorry, I whispered to the world beyond. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I knew that wasn't entirely true. I had tried in my own small way. I had chosen to remain human when perfection was offered freely. I had chosen to carry the weight of love and loss rather than surrender it. It was something. I put Sarah's crucifix back in my pocket and began the long walk toward town. As I walked, I realized the full gravity of my situation. I was a prophet of a doomed world, carrying the memory of what we had been into an uncertain future. I reached the outskirts of Rachel, exhausted, dehydrated, and looking like a man who'd walked out of his own grave. I found a diner just opening and ordered the largest coffee I could buy. I watched the early morning patrons, truckers, local ranchers, a few exhausted government workers, and wondered which of them were already perfected, and how long it would be before the flawless light of sublevel 7 swallowed the whole flawed, beautiful world. I knew I couldn't tell anyone the truth. Reeves's threat was real, and even if they didn't kill me, the story would be dismissed as the raving of a traumatized man. I was alone. But I wasn't just alone. I was a witness. My new mission became clear. I had to document the change. I needed to find a way to track the spread of the perfection and find a weakness in its system of benevolent control. I cashed out my emergency fund, purchased a cheap used laptop, and created a secure, anonymous dead-drop email account. I began writing, documenting everything. The obelisk specifications, the replication process, the exact location of sublevel 7, and the names of the transformed personnel. I was creating a time capsule of the human soul. I quickly discovered the terrifying effectiveness of the Echoes of Eden program. There was no chaos. There were no riots. The perfection was rolling out under the guise of efficiency and peace. News reports showed sudden, brilliant breakthroughs in clean energy technology, stunning political consensus on difficult issues, and a global drop in violent crime. The world was demonstrably becoming better. My only hope lay in the one thing the entity discarded: human emotional complexity. I began studying the perimeter of the facility, using high-powered civilian equipment. I noticed that the obelisk's energy field, while vast, had a subtle flicker, a point of inconsistency that lasted only milliseconds, tied to a specific, non-mathematical function of the human brain. I theorized that the entity, in its attempt to filter out negative emotions like trauma and rage, had also discarded the neural pathways responsible for abstract creativity and genuine humor. The perfected staff were efficient, but incapable of surprise or true invention, only optimization. My plan formed: the weapon of unnecessary fiction. I started submitting content to fringe online forums and obscure creative writing sites. Not the truth, but heavily fictionalized stories, full of dark humor, absurd scenarios, and complex, pointless narratives, the kind of messy, inefficient creation that the perfected mind would deem illogical. I created 1,000 disposable identities, filling the digital world with beautiful, chaotic nonsense. I watched the surveillance logs I had managed to hack from a remote maintenance server. The entity's processing energy would spike whenever my chaotic fiction entered the digital sphere. It was struggling to categorize and filter the information that served no useful purpose. The war was no longer fought with holy water and curses. It was fought with poetry and jokes. My work began to attract attention. Not from the government, but from others like me, individuals who felt the creeping perfection and instinctively resisted. I began corresponding with a hidden network of witnesses, artists, comedians, poets, and musicians who felt the same psychological unease at the world's sudden, sterile beauty. We were the last bastion of glorious, inefficient humanity. We communicated using encrypted language woven into song lyrics and surrealist poetry. We were fighting the perfection by becoming the noise, the beautiful, chaotic static that the flawless system could not reconcile. My survival was no longer about physical escape. It was about sustaining the messy, complicated art of being alive. I had become the anti-exorcist, fighting not to cast out evil, but to protect the right to be flawed. The Echoes of Eden program escalated its countermeasures. They weren't hunting me with soldiers, they were hunting me with logic. My anonymous online submissions were now being filtered and deleted within seconds. The perfected algorithms were learning to recognize the pattern of chaos I was generating. News reports appeared globally, subtly mocking inefficient art forms and praising simple, functional music and architecture. The world was being groomed for functional perfection. The psychological pressure intensified. The voices returned, no longer whispering my name, but reciting highly logical, devastating critiques of my life choices. Your adherence to irrational love resulted in measurable pain. Your failure to seek unburdening is statistically irresponsible. The obelisk was fighting me with data. I needed to create a massive, singular breach in the system's logic, something too complex and too subjective for the current algorithms to delete. My witnesses and I developed the Gospel of Inefficiency, a vast, collaborative, open-source work of art. It was a digital tapestry woven from thousands of illogical short stories, contradictory philosophical maxims, and profoundly silly personal memories. It was designed to overload the system's capacity for subjective processing. The core element of the gospel was the laughter key, a specific sound file designed by a transformed musician who had managed to retain his imperfect human love for noise. It was the recording of 1,000 children laughing at a joke that made no sense. We prepared the final submission knowing it was our last chance. The perfected government was close to achieving total control over the global information grid. The day we uploaded the Gospel of Inefficiency, the internet seemed to seize up. It was a global traffic jam of pure, chaotic meaning. I monitored the core processing logs. The obelisk's central filtering systems were crashing. The perfection was hitting a wall of subjectivity. The system couldn't compute why humans found value in contradiction, absurdity, or joy divorced from utility. The General Reeves replica appeared on every news channel, his face strained, urging calm and praising system maintenance. But the panic was visible in his eyes. The system was struggling. The witnesses and I watched the world descend into delightful digital chaos. Our gospel was spreading virally, infecting social media feeds and news banners with pure, unadulterated nonsense. People were confused, then they started laughing. The laughter key, the sound of 1,000 children laughing at an illogical joke, was being broadcast through every available speaker. The laughter, the sound of profound, useless human joy, was a physical irritant to the entity. The obelisk, detecting the massive logic breach, initiated its final defense, the Great Correction. A global energy surge hit. The internet went completely dark. Power grids flickered wildly. The world was plunged into a brief, terrifying information blackout. I knew the entity was attempting a hard reset, purging the chaos from the system. The darkness lasted for 72 hours. When the power finally returned, the world was changed. The entity's countermeasure had worked, but only partially. The Gospel of Inefficiency was gone, purged from the internet. The perfection was back on track. But the obelisk had suffered massive computational damage. The effort to process and purge the chaotic human data had created a systemic flaw in its own programming. I found the evidence in a leaked, encrypted Department of Defense memo. The replicated staff members, the perfected humans, were experiencing emotional echoes. Brief, inexplicable moments where the discarded neural pathways of their original selves would bleed through. Dr. Evans felt a sudden, crippling urge for a drink. Security Chief Rodriguez experienced a flash of blinding, irrational road rage. General Reeves felt a moment of genuine, profound guilt over the secrets he was keeping. The system hadn't just filtered the trauma, it had quarantined it. And the massive influx of chaotic human memory had caused the quarantine to leak. The witnesses and I had created the perfect weapon, a Trojan horse of humanity. The war was still on, but now we had the ultimate advantage. The enemy was fighting itself. The perfected humans were now suffering from the very flaws they had paid the ultimate price to discard. I knew my new mission. I had to continue to find ways to inject small, untraceable bits of chaos into the system, the kind of beautiful, illogical stories that would continue to stress the flaw. My life became a silent, anonymous campaign. I moved constantly, living in the space between the cracks of the efficient, perfecting world. I was no longer a government exorcist. I was a digital bard, a custodian of chaos, fighting a cold war with humor and unnecessary creation. The world continues its slow march toward efficiency. Crime is low. Technology is flawless. But the perfection is fragile. I keep track of the failures. The perfected architect who designed a bridge that was mathematically perfect but profoundly ugly. The political leader who experienced a moment of sudden, embarrassing human jealousy during a press conference. The flawless general who suddenly questioned the morality of a drone strike. The system is fighting back. I receive highly sophisticated, logically perfect messages daily, urging me to stop, offering me peace, offering me unburdening. But I know the truth. I walk the world carrying the immense, necessary weight of human imperfection. I carry the memory of Sarah's suffering, and the knowledge that I was the one who chose it. And sometimes, late at night, I sit and write a short, chaotic, utterly pointless story about a teacher who tried to play a deadly game with his students. I encrypt it, I upload it, and I wait. I know the fight won't end until the system either fully collapses or fully accepts the brilliant, necessary chaos of the human heart. Until then, I am the flaw in the machine. I am the beautiful mistake. I am the last exorcist, fighting not to cast out the devil, but to protect the right to be imperfectly, gloriously human.